Buddhist contemplative is our teacher, when you know for yourselves that these qualities are skillful, these qualities are blameless, and these qualities are praised by the wise, these qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to welfare and to happiness, then you should enter and remain in them. Now, this quote alone, I think, will be sufficient to keep us talking for a week. So, if there's substantial questions about this citation, I would ask us to talk about them at the end of the talk, because otherwise I will not get through it, because this citation is one of the most popular and hugely problematic, at least at the intellectual level, right? As I'm sure you're all intuiting as you read it over. Well, what do we do then?
Right. Well, what is the word these? What these are they referring to?
What?
Where it says these qualities?
These qualities.
The ones just said not go on?
No, the idea is that there are certain qualities, the path factors, for instance. Other ones that we'll talk about, enlightenment factors, we'll talk about them later. Certain virtues, those are the ones that you need to cultivate. But the reason...
The contrast to the ones you just said.
Exactly, yeah, quite. So the distinction here is that the highest wisdom is not the wisdom of reason, but the wisdom of direct experiential insight. Okay, the Bhavana Maya Panya. And the point of contrast must be noted here is that much of Western thought, not all, of course, is an attempt to do away with skepticism by means of argument. And if your conclusion follows from the premises, then no more skepticism. Right? But the Buddhist path is one which uses reason, but takes the meditator even beyond it. And therefore, the truth for the Buddha, as far as Nibbana is concerned, is not exhausted by propositional thinking. Okay? And I can't really talk anymore about that. Right? If that seems at least to have some intuitive purchase for you, I recommend you go learn to meditate. Because after that, it's just, hot air. So the third fetter, attachments to rite and rituals. This fetter is designed to combat the view that religious devotion to certain patterns of behavior, such as sacrifice, petitionary prayer, mysticism, can result in liberation. Since this fetter is aimed mostly at ritualistic veneer of organized religion, and our topic of discussion is more philosophical, and I don't want to offend anybody, I'm going to just leave it aside. Because it's fairly transparent, and I think anyone can sort of understand it on their own terms, and we'll just sort of leave it at that. Now, we can get through the second and third stages very quickly, because they're closely related. The second stage of insight is one who has obviously achieved the eradication of the first three fetters, but has greatly attenuated their attachment to sensual pleasure and ill will, which is the same as at the second two of the unwholesome roots, lust and hatred. Okay? Greatly attenuated, not eradicated completely, because those two things, that aversion to the world, things we don't like, and that lust after the things we want, that is the deepest sort of psychological conditioning of the human mind that keeps us moving through the world. And completely transcending that kind of cognitive economy is an incredibly profound achievement. It is not something that is undertaken or achieved lightly. And then there's the non-returner, the third stage, who has, in fact, eradicated these two unwholesome roots. Okay? Now, the fourth stage, there are still 5 more fetters after those first 5. Okay? And the fourth stage, the Arhat, is one who's eradicated all of them. Okay? And the remaining 5 are attachment to rebirth in a realm of form, attachment to rebirth in a formless realm, conceit, restlessness, and ignorance. Now, this attachment to rebirth in a realm of form and formlessness, that's kind of like a little bit esoteric and weird. The best way to understand it, I think, is to, in a philosophical way, is to think about it in terms of, it's sort of a subtle philosophical point about the way we conceive of an absolute. Okay? That the absolute lies in the origin of all form, some kind of Platonism, perhaps, right? Or that the origin of all being is in a formless totality which exists beyond distinctions, things like that.
So what do you mean by absolute?
An absolute, like a ground of all being, a causal terminus for all that exists, the first cause per se. And then conceit, restlessness, and ignorance, those are sort of psychological factors that are important. Ignorance is more subtle than that. Mike, yes?
Okay, so the first two just attachment to rebirth, period, but divided into two categories?
Yeah.
Are there other kinds of rebirth you might be attached to?
Yes, there are. There are many different realms, which we'll talk about. But one who has come to this level is way beyond those. Right? These are very subtle. Yes?
What do you mean by rebirth?
Can I get there? It's part of it. I'll answer your question, but in due course. Is that all right? Good
I
question.
was wondering if you're talking about some sort of supernatural realm. You mentioned Platonism, which is a supernatural. I was
Yes.
under the impression that Buddhists didn't believe in supernatural realms.
Well, it depends on what you mean by supernatural. For Buddhists, consciousness is a fundamental reality. So therefore, there is for what I think in the way you're using the term, yes, there are. I believe. You know what? There's like 3 or 4 slides dedicated exactly to that. So we'll broach that excellent question when we get there. Well then. So. Earlier I made this point that Buddhism, Dhamma, seems to have this middle point, or strives at least for a middle path between philosophy and religion. Rebirth is definitely an element which borrows from religion. It does so in the following way. Consciousness and mentality in general is a fundamental natural kind. And in that sense, and its processes of becoming extend over the lives of many different forms of embodiment. Okay? Now, this is different from reincarnation. Reincarnation is the view that there is a substantial soul entity which moves from life to life, unchanging, forever eternal, until it realizes its true nature and then returns to the God. Rebirth is more like, it's the idea, if any of you are familiar with the philosophy of William James, who coined the term stream of consciousness, it's the idea that our awareness is a constantly fluctuating field of beholding which changes across time, but it does so across many different forms of embodiment, and that those different forms of embodiment take place at different levels of subtlety. Some realms are called the realms of form, as we discussed already, and formless realms. There are many different realms, and in the term that you're using, it is supernatural in the sense that it's not empiricism. It's not, the world of sense perception does not even give us a fraction of the totality of reality, which can be realized by looking within. Now, that being said, there are plenty of contemporary Buddhist scholars who are trying to weed away all of this stuff and just cut it completely off from the theory, the teaching, and just sort of use the psychology of Buddhism and the idea of meditation to achieve happiness in this life, and that's it. But the very idea of Nibbana is to escape samsara, which is the cycle of life and death, birth and rebirth, over and over and over again, forever. And I don't think, even if you reject this as complete religious hodgepodge, that doesn't mean you can't take advantage of the meditative psychology and work on this life and achieve some measure of happiness. But I think it's important for us to realize that, the Buddha, at least, I think, believed what he was saying. And it's quite clear that this is what he was on about.
Yeah. What is being reborn doing?
Well, it's like... Good question. Very difficult to answer in precise terms. The idea is that it's more like, it's kind of like, the way I try to think about it, and in order to explain it really rigorously, I'd have to talk about a conceptual structure called dependent origination, which is ridiculously complicated, and I don't want to do that here because it's too much. It's a lot, but consider it this way, it's sort of like, it's got 2 ingredients. It's substantial causal realism and the view that consciousness is a fundamental natural kind, and that causal chain is constantly flowing, and that it flows at such a rate so quickly that the turning over of the atoms in our body is like a turtle compared to it. And so the vibrations of consciousness continue to vibrate at an inconceivable rapidity even after the turtle pace vibrations of the body terminate. Now that doesn't mean that there's a substantial soul which is always there. It just means that there's consciousness constantly fluctuating and vibrating through the world, and that the physical body that it embodies in this life, once it dies, those vibrations are strong enough that they keep going. That's the best I can do without giving you a substantial account of dependent origination, which I just really don't want to do.